Einen schönen guten Abend.
Good evening.
Und herzlich willkommen.
And a very warm welcome here at Heinrich-Böll Foundation. Ladies and gentlemen, we are delighted to have you here, and we are delighted to have organized this great event with wonderful guests. We've had a very interesting conference day with a lot of expertise from different sectors of society in order to address the perspectives on Europe's future after the elections. But as we all know, after the election is before the next elections and amidst elections, and this may be the right point of time in order to assure us where are we standing after these elections, but with a perspective on the next legislature of the European Parliament, the next European Commission, and with regard to the reforms that we have to face. And we've talked about these reforms. As a foundation, we published a lot of papers that will be issued in a volume, and the documents have been written before the European elections took place, and all the challenges are mentioned there. They are checked there, but we haven't reached this yet, and we'd like to address this now. And therefore, I'd like to give a very warm welcome to Anna Luhrmann, the Minister of State for Europe and Climate at the Federal Foreign Office, and we are thrilled to have here in order to give us some inspiration and ideas, and then later we'll have a debate with more guests. Anna, the floor is yours.
Ja, wunderschönen guten Abend.
A wonderful evening to everybody. I'm thrilled to be here. Of course, I know by looking at the results of the election, you can become a little bit expressed. When we look at France and the United States, it doesn't become any better. So we may ask ourselves, what is this all about? And is it maybe just a reflex? And shouldn't we go home and sit on the sofa? This is at least a couple, this is quite a backlash, at least from a green perspective. And then you look at Viktor Orban with the slogan, "Make Europe Great Again." And I'd have to think what he wants with this going back, and he wants to show us that he and his colleagues, they are going to dominate the narrative and the debate. And this is something we have to have present by looking at the attacks on social media, the hatred, the destruction that is taking place. There are people around who want to paralyze us. This is what they aim for. The challenges may be too big, and this is their solution. And we as Greens, we have to tackle these challenges. We have to face them. We see that democracy has been tested during the last decades, and how to pass this test. And by looking around, by looking at the European elections, we have to make it that we are the cool guys, that we are the cool ones, having a narrative on the future, how Europe is supposed to be, where we want to get with Europe. And this is what I'd like to address. We want to make Europe's future again. This is what we have to be able to do. And this is what I mean. And there may be three questions: democracy, freedom, peace, and climate. And Tarek and I, we are professional politics for decades, and we ask ourselves: is the democracy
aber eben auch nach Polen. Ich komme gerade aus Polen von den
something we can save. I've been to Poland to consultations between Germany and Polish. Yes, and we've seen the right may be able to win elections, but they may also lose them. And what do we have to do right? We have to reflect on ourselves. We have to be critical about ourselves. And this is not just a given, something we see as normal in a conversation. I take French lessons in order to give you an example, and I want to continue to do so even beyond next Sunday. And my teacher, my French teacher, he told me that you vote with voting cards and you put them in an envelope and you receive. We don't do it the same way in Germany. They send you the papers and they send you also documentation of the parties. And he showed me all this documentation, and my French is between B1 and B2. And then there was the document of the Rassemblement National. I understood it immediately. There was nothing I had to ask anything about. It was about me getting worried with regard to migrants, and they would just give me a better future. And with the Greens, I had to ask, what does this mean? Is this a subjunctive? What does this mean? And what is the meaning of this long, long sentence? And we as Greens, if we want to gain back territory, we have to communicate better. And we have to really do this and not just talk about this, starting with the language and then by continuing with TikTok and other channels. It's about empathy. It's about emotions. It's about being on an equal footing. And when it comes to the party, to the parliamentary group, this is a topic for each of us. But we don't want just to scratch the surface. We have to be substantial, and we have to deal with the questions. Do we take it seriously, what is worrying the people in our country? And the simple slogans of the Ampel coalition, a country that works. Yes. That has been the idea of the Ampel coalition, to work together and to make it happen, to have these huge infrastructures problems being solved at school, the Deutsche Bahn, the railway system. So we're all happy to be here. Nobody has been late because of the Deutsche Bahn, because of their trains. This is what people see when I need a new ID card, for example. Maybe I could even be able to do it online, and I shouldn't just have to wait for 3 years in order to get one. So the narrative that there are people from abroad that come here, take away everything from us. And this works because there are a lot of things that don't work, and that there are regions who are left behind. And this is also the reason why the AfD is successful there. And we have to start there. And then, of course, we'll win. And then we have to address the racism that is created and strengthened by them. But I think a good part will be already solved when we talk to those and when we reach out to those who are unhappy about what is the current situation here of Germany. And we have to be self-confident. We have to face the racism. And by looking at the Euro Cup, so there is obviously a lot of negative talks by the AfD about the German football team, and they seem to be unhappy that Russia is not taking part. We have heard about the corruption cases, many corruption cases, and then we have to think about how to create a positive vision, showing how democracy works. And if we don't make it possible that the trains are on time, that there are enough teachers at schools, then of course others may be voted into office who do it better. This is the basic principle of democracy. And by talking about a future vision for European democracy, to make Europe future-proof again, so we have to address health issues, education, we have to make sure that there is social justice and some other topics more. And this is it in what we have to do in order to make Europe better and really great again. We've heard about Switzerland during the last days, last week, and we've heard about Italy, the flooding there. I think most of us have understood this is about the climate crisis, but a lot may ask themselves, is it even doable to do something about it? And when I was 12 or 13 years old working for Greenpeace and then giving out leaflets stopping the climate change, this is not doable any longer because we are in the midst of the climate change. And of course, this made us desperate. We work on this topic. We may be hopeless sometimes, and we have to do a lot. It's a huge thing to do to transition from renewables, from fossil fuels to renewables. But a lot of things have happened. So we've made it happen that 60% of electricity generation is now being done by renewables. And a lot of people don't even know about that. Here, I think most of us know about that, and we have to talk about it. We have to communicate that. And we have to continue to work on the topic. We have to look at one another. And we as Greens, we've talked about the heating issue, and we have to think about that, how to be passionate for an ambitious climate politics in order to make our economy clean, and we have to take everybody on board. And I'm sure we can make it. And we have the Climate and Social Fund, and we have to put it in the center. Europe should be the first carbon neutral continent, but we need the support of the population. And then the most difficult of all the topics, the peace. Peace. In Germany, when we talk about peace, this buzzword peace, then we hear Sarah Wagenknecht asking, when will there be peace in Ukraine? That she is so courageous or bold to ask this. I think the most simple way would Russia receding back to Russia, deciding so. And this is the reason why we support Ukraine against this war of aggression. And I visited Odessa 2 weeks ago together with my Polish counterpart. We saw the terror there. We saw the destruction next to the port of Odessa, and we saw all the devastation. They just need 2 minutes for the next rocket. So they live under permanent threat. So this is the reason why we have to do more. And when it comes to Sarah Wagenknecht, I'd like to tell her, just call Putin in Moscow, and then peace will be doable. But we may feel angry, especially those we know Ukraine well. We have to become better as Greens, as progressive forces. We have to ask ourselves how to make it happen to have a just and fair peace in Ukraine. This is a question we have to focus on even more, because this is what the people in Ukraine need. They want this war to be ending, and they want to have peace. And we need to design the pathways towards this. There was the peace conference in Switzerland, and multilateralism has a force, and diplomacy has a certain strength. And this started small seedlings in order to create solidarity, international solidarity, and this is something that is done in conflict research to identify these items you can start to work on. We have to use these tools. We have to put the Ukrainian perspective into the center, at the forefront, and we have to reach a situation where Putin understands, yes, I got it, and I cannot get to my target by using weapons, and this then will lead to a lasting peace. This is what we have to talk about. This is what we have to say to radical right-wing people. Should Ukraine stop to fight, then they would be oppressed. And we've seen what happened in Bucha. And we need better visions. We have to draw them better. We are a party that it's not just a beautiful weather party or a party living off the peace dividend in post-war Germany. We are a party focusing for peace, for fundamental rights, human rights, even when it's difficult. And we have to defend these values. And we cannot retrocede towards our private lives. We have to fight. And my grandmother would say, and I think we are able to do this because only the strong ones will survive.
Ja, vielen Dank, Anna.
Thank you so much, Anna. Only the strong ones will make it through the winter. And as my grandmother would say in these contexts, so when we talked about France and having the right to vote, yeah, I raised my hand, and you can do it digitally, and the data protection regulation is also valid in France. And this is also a topic, so how the state can we can learn from this, and I'd like to invite our other panelist, Tariq Abou-Chadi. He's a professor of European Union issues and comparative European politics at the Nuffield College at the University of Oxford. And currently, he's also an Einstein visiting fellow at Humboldt University here in Berlin, and his research focuses on the transformation of Western European party politics. Then I'd like to ask Annika Brockschmidt to join us. She's a journalist and author.
Ja, sie ist auch freie Journalistin.
She's a freelance journalist and has worked for the ZDF, one of the state broadcasters in Germany, and she produces a podcast or two of them, and she wrote a book, America's Good Warriors, on the power of the religious right in the U.S. This was a bestseller in 2021. And then there is another book. Whoever is interested may have a look. This is about the Republican Party and how extremists took over the Republican Party. And when it comes to France, I'd like to give a warm welcome to Chantal Bloch. Chantal Kopf, she's a member of parliament. She is here in order to replace Ricarda Lang, who unfortunately cannot be with us. and she's also a member of the German-French Parliamentary Assembly. And we may start, Chantal, with you. The question that has been raised before, how do we find a new way of addressing the people? A lot of things we want to reform, the French-German engine, for example. This is something sometimes a little bit too intellectual and something in special organizations. How to get rid of that? What do you do in Parliament in order to put such a topic into the center of the debate? Or will they just say, oh, this is something for the European guys? Thank you very much, and greetings from Ricarda. I'm happy to be here. I think the question is excellent because we have an issue with European topics and topics of the French-German friendship, and we have issues to transmit those towards the citizenship in Germany. It's very often very much an expert bubble, and we have several institutions who deal with German-French relationships, cross-border relationships, and the people ask themselves, how do I notice anything about that in my daily life? Or is there anything moving forward, or are you just talking? And then we have to explain that these processes, European processes, you've mentioned the EU reform, where treaties need to be changed. These are very, very long-lasting processes, and this is something that cannot usually be ended during a legislature of the Bundestag in 4 years, but we are always targeting a moment where there may be a window of opportunity where we can make things happen in order to get rid of this unanimity principle. And this is also challenging, how to communicate this to the people. And I work a lot on issues with France, and I may be less optimistic than Anna Lührmann, especially when it comes to the parliamentary level. It will become more difficult to have talks with our French friends when it's when the Rassemblement National will have a majority or an absolute majority. And then we have to ask what is going to happen with the Parliamentary Assembly between France and Germany. And we have to learn a lot, but I think we are going to address this during this talk. Tarek Abou-Chadi, the question.
Diese Parteienlandschaft ist ja auch extrem undurchsichtig.
Parties landscape. It's very difficult to understand this on a European level, and this may also make a difference. It may be very abstract, and the EU elections, they haven't been very European elections like the predecessors one, but we had a huge turnout because they were used as testing elections on a national level. And we want to make a lot of issues more visible, and we want to have a positive agenda. I totally coincide. The last elections wasn't exactly about politics in the EU. We very often talk about second-order elections. These are elections where you can express a lot, but not a preference for policy issues on the European level. And this time, this was very, very emphasized. It was very often we against them, and it was against the radical right, and it wasn't about policy. And there was also a lot of movement how to evaluate politicians, and we see in the posters of Olaf Scholz and Sarah Wagenknecht, they didn't run, but they were omnipresent. And what we've seen is that opposition parties gained everywhere, and I think everywhere the opposition parties became stronger, especially when those in government are in office for a while by now. So what to do then? There's nobody here who belongs to Volt. They have a strong issue to have shared lists, and we have to recognize this when we really want to find new ways. Then we have to think about that. There may be some people joining one another, and then they decide like magicians, and then we have a president of the commission and a president of the council. This doesn't help the people that this is linked to the executive power on the European level. There is a deficit in the process, and people notice that and during the process. So there is a deficit, and the people notice that. Yes, this has been a topic too, but nonetheless, it wasn't then becoming something very negative or leading to something very negative about the EU. And I was also a member of the European Parliament, and when I was in office, there were the radical rights, but they were considered to be the weirdos, and nobody understood Jean-Marie Le Pen. But this has changed. Do we see the same happening, what happened to the Republican Party? Well, this is a little bit difficult. It's difficult to compare directly. If we are able to learn a lesson by looking at the Republican Party during the last decades, and this is something I was told by Republican strategies I talked to for my book, and this may be of interest for you, when you talk to conservative colleagues, sometimes when it's about this mythical firewall, and we can also discuss if it really does exist or not, but the moral argument, I think now, by looking at the results of the European elections, I think it would be more helpful with conservative colleagues to talk about power. This is a good argument. This is what Bill Kristol, a Republican strategist, did. He's not a member any longer. This is something he learned, and this, I think, he thinks this is something German and European conservatives should learn. This was a mistake of the Republican Party, and this is also proved by research. So if conservative forces open towards the right, they will benefit from that during the elections on a short term, but on a longer term, this is something negative for them, because they established right-wing topics in the mainstream. There are hardcore right-wing voters, but I think nonetheless, most of the voters will continue to vote the radical right. But later, you cannot get rid of those ghosts you ask for, you called for. And there are differences between our system, our political system, and the US-American system. And there may be some ideas about strategies and how to deal with colleagues of other parties. So by looking at the decisions that have been taken after the elections with regard to the top positions, we see Ursula von der Leyen, the High Commissioner for Foreign Policy, Kaja Kallas. She's more kind of a liberal politician.
Ins rechte Spektrum blinken würde, sozusagen.
She's nobody who will flirt with the right, and Antonio Costa for the European Council. This is not exactly a signal that we see a trend towards the right or mainstream politician following the right. By looking at the European Council, we see that there is an alliance possible with Geert Wilders. There may be ministers of Geert Wilders in the Council of Ministers. And will it be possible to forge alliances
mit einbezieht
in order to integrate the conservatives, but by having limits towards the right? Well, there are two different levels. There's the personal one, it's about the people, and then there is the political one. It's now about a majority in the European Parliament in order to have a president in the Commission who doesn't rely on the right. There have been talks with the Greens. This may be possible, this may be doable, and we should use this possibility. And we can say that our darkest fears haven't become true, but from a democracy perspective, the result is not a good one. When it comes to content, to issues, it's more complex, and this is also related with the migration issue, and we all focus, I think, on that. And we talked about the reform of the European asylum system, GEAS, and with the German politics, this wasn't the clear green doctrine. We had already a compromise because of the coalition, and we just had two partners in Luxembourg and in Portugal. Both governments lost the elections when being at the government. So the implementation, the realization of GEAS, the protection standards that are defined there, that those are implemented, this was very difficult, almost impossible. And when it comes to migration,
Normalisierung eben von rechts.
And I am worried that we see a further normalization of the positions of the radical right. And we have to think how to tackle this. And we need a new perspective. All European countries need immigration. We need more talent. We need skilled workers. And we all benefited immensely from immigration, and we need a positive narrative. And through common European rules, we can, of course, tackle the problems with that. But through which alliances? And sometimes I lack creativity. Which stakeholders are there? And Chantal, I'd like to ask the question to you, because in your own coalition, sometimes you don't know what do they think, and sometimes you think about forging an alliance. But is it possible to do this from Parliament, starting in the Parliament, and with representatives of the government who then take part in negotiations with the European Council, who have to make deals there? Is there a possibility of a debate in Parliament? So, following the example of the French-German Parliamentary Assembly? Well, yes, this is, for example, what the German-French Parliamentary Assembly wants to do, and we have also parliamentary diplomacy with Poland, which is a very positive development. And being involved with the government, this plays a huge role. We had this in the German-French Parliamentary Assembly. We had a debate on migration, or whilst on a mission to other countries, we as Greens and progressives, as part of the German government, we're quite isolated, I'd say. and you need to be realistic and to have realistic expectations, and you need influence and how to have an impact, and the government made it visible, the Rwanda model within the GS negotiations, and this is something we should focus on to use the influence we have. And as a Green politician, I find it very positive that there were talks between von der Leyen and the heads of the parliamentary groups of the Green in the European Parliament, but we'll see it in the European elections and with the questions, where do young people go? And we see different answers when it comes to migration politics, and there may be also other answers wished for. And when it comes to alliances, it's not just about alliances, it's also about giving answers. And Anna, so when it comes to answers to content, so what do you think? What are the topics that the European Union has to deal with and start to tackle?
Ja.
Nee, also ich glaube, eines der zentralen Punkte ist natürlich.
One of the most central items is the green transition. And I think I visited Poland recently and the Czech Republic, and I understood during these longer missions how bad we communicated. And the main important acts of the Green Deal were enforced or were passed against the votes of these countries. So it was about having less potential for blocking something. But when we decide on something and we don't take the population on board in these countries, green transition has become something really, really negative. And this is something I've learned, and I wanted to know about the communication strategies with regard to the green transition. And again, this is this huge project. And in the Czech Republic, 11% of the votes went to the motorist parties, to a driver's party. And the semi-knowledge about the Green Deal, they use it, they make good use of this by applying semi-illegal campaigns. But we need to implement the Green Deal, we have to communicate it better, we have to support it socially. And again, it's the topics I've mentioned before, security and peace. And the question is how to transmit this, how to communicate this, and how to make an agenda out of this. And with the perspective of the recent European elections, we see that people obviously have a totally different emotional background, and this leads them to vote for certain parties. I'd like to make a point with regard to the government, to the German government as a positive actor when it comes to asylum and migration. My perception is a totally different one. The asylum compromise, the new remuneration cards, or the new cards in order to shop, and then the deportation to Afghanistan. With all this, I haven't seen the Greens as an opposition towards these issues, and I think we have to say that very directly and very openly. We know that Annika Brockschmidt is totally right. It's not just about right-wing parties, but the government itself has been very active in these fields, and this contributed to the fact that the radical right and their topics are leading people to vote for them, and they know how it works, and this depends also on how parties, politicians, the elites think about that and talk about that. It's not just that people think these are the main topics. Asylum, for example, it's also a product of media penetration on all channels. And there is no progressive connotation of these topics. This has become a topic where the most important issue is who's the best at reducing, at limiting migration. And the German government helped to get us into this mess.
Muss man erstmal so stehen lassen, vielleicht.
So, yeah, this is what you analyzed, and we can just keep it this way. But we see that this topic is recurring. We talk about it all the time, and maybe we should get into the debate in order to not fall into certain traps. We've heard about it. Only the strong ones will survive the winter. So, and Stefan Mau also talked about trigger points. So when we see that these topics are addressed and these programs are addressed, you somehow get into the debate. And Annika Brockschmidt, a question for you. How about your experiences?
So, dass man an der Stelle einfach aus dem Weg gehen kann und sagen kann,
can you avoid these debates?
Wie man es zum Beispiel nicht machen
Well, how to not do it
Joe Biden getan
is what Joe Biden did during the first debate. His strongest abortion, he pivoted from his strongest topic to his weakest one, migration. And we've seen it in the United States. The Republicans make migration a main topic, or the main topic, and Trump repeats his rhetorics in each rally, and there was a fight going on a couple of months ago, and it was about the two governments.
Auf ein extrem konservatives Gesetzespaket für ihre Verhältnisse geeinigt hat.
Who agreed on a quite conservative package of bills in order to try that Biden's weak numbers were compensated, and this is also proved by evidence. Whenever you imitate and try to copy radical rights, then everybody thinks, oh, this is the most dominant topic, not only the conservatives and the right-wing ones. So, and you don't go with the copycat. You vote the original, and it's not about starting into or getting into the debate and say, this is just reality. This doesn't help. It's when we talk about climate protection, it's about a counter narrative. We have to offer that, and we need a convincing one. And when it comes to climate protection, this is a very good target for the right-wing people, and this is also the same with regard to the climate, to the migration topic. Those who think globally, they need, from an international perspective, they need to face that they become the scapegoats. Brussels sent you the refugees. This is, for example, a slogan. So you need a communication strategy. You need a very clear profile, maybe even against your coalition partners. You have to be visible in your opposition. You have to communicate this, and you shouldn't give the impression that you try to get conservative votes without having an alternative and offering a real alternative. And the question is not only what is the real plan, but it's also about the communication and about visibility, so that you avoid the impression that there are several parties within the German landscape. They all shifted towards the right. There may be differences, but we remember the cover of the Spiegel, of the magazine The Spiegel, and this also influenced the general debate. And this is also difficult for progressive voters. And this is also, and you risk parts of your electorate, of your traditional electorate, and you risk to lose them. Anna, the question is not just about the narratives regarding climate, for example, and the Green Deal. We have to sharpen our position, but it's also about becoming clearer, to have a more transparent standpoint when it comes to the agenda of climate and migration and how to deal with refugees, for example. We have to face this more openly within the European Union. We have to...
Aber also, das ist wirklich ein sehr schwieriges und komplexes Thema.
It is a very, very complex and difficult topic for us. And what I just said, relating to us, Luxembourg, Portugal, as progressive players in the European asylum seeking policy, so there is no more progressive approach. So what is the yardstick? It's a yardstick where the other European countries are, or where we would like to be. And if it is the latter, then we would definitely like to be more progressive. But then we need the requisite majorities. And in migration and flight policy, we need to achieve two things. On the one hand, we clearly need to express empathy with those who had to flee. And I had a very important encounter, a key encounter really, with a refugee person. 2 years ago, she came to Germany as a part of family reunion. She hadn't seen her husband for years, and she definitely wants to become a doctor, and it's all but easy. She needs integration courses. And I thought, and you want to put this woman among a number of Taliban, so you need to create this empathy, and this type of narratives needs to enter the debate and gain a more focused position. And on the other hand, and that's what we have to achieve as well, we have those stories and encounters of people, like the person near Frankfurt, in the Frankfurt region. She's from the Green Party, and she really wants to do a lot for refugees. And she invited me, and she said, okay, even if you give me more money, where do I need, where is the housing? How shall I organize it? And how shall I organize education? There is no staff. There is no skilled labor for that. So it's a very rich region around Frankfurt am Main, and there is a shortage of both. So on the one hand, a lot of progressive policy bring it to the agenda around migration and refugees without fueling all the negative aspects. And this is what I see in the Bundestag. If we make it all very easy, it fails only because the Green Party is blocking everything, you know. A conflict stays on the agenda, especially if it is within a political party. And there is a simple correlation. One might take a closer look, but there is a very clear correlation between arrival figures and other factors. And, you know, it is not only out of a vacuum, like who manages to bring topics on the agenda. For that reason, I believe, you know, if the human factor is to be maintained in asylum policy, we need to understand that within this toxic environment, you need to talk about this topic with a human touch, but at the same time, you must not make it too easy for, you know, extremists who would be fueling the toxic debates. Would you like to answer to that?
In die sozialwissenschaftliche Diskussion zu dieser Frage geben.
We don't need a detailed social science discussion, but I've just read an article in a peer-reviewed magazine. So public opinion really influences it a lot. So there is a strong independent effect that really comes from journalism, and you can see it in Germany at a particular time of the year, like 3 months ago. The topic has lost interest, and it's not the problems that have vanished, but we talked about other topics, and, you know, people said we're talking less about, you know, there is such a fluctuation away from topics. It can't be explained by any structural problems or challenges, because the situation has not changed in the past 5 years. So it's really the big question, who is talking about the topic, how are they talking about it, and then the federal president says we need to solve this topic or this issue. So, of course, people are saying, like, they use this type of glasses to answer the question directly, and then underfinancing of a local community and scarcity of flats. So
Sie bewerten die policy
assessing the policy topics, and then, of course, people are adding their own experience. So it is all strongly influenced by the question of what narratives people are getting and the way the public debate is led in the media. Okay, the Greens were not exactly those who said, oh, we are not contradicting at all. So the Greens in the past 2 years have really moved into the focus, and this includes migration policy and definitely messages where the Greens contradicted.
Ihnen ist es auch gefallen, diese Frage sozusagen
heard about the media situation, and I would like to answer to Angelika Brockschmidt. And how do we manage to create a media space so that those people who have an attitude are not simply like denounced, because this is a political offering, because this seems to have become more difficult. Oh yes, absolutely. It is a topic where media criticism is one of the big topics. Not simply politically, but people like me working in the media industry, and where we really have to sweep our own doorstep and admit that the composition of editorial teams contributes to the question of what focus we have in research, and the composition all the way through to, are we talking
wollen.
whether the Green Party wants to ban schnitzels from company restaurant menus. So the media houses have a funding problem. And it sounds really trivial, but everything that's online has to pay off. And outreach sounds good, and that's the talk show model that is preserving itself all the time.
Den Grünen gar nicht aus, wie das intern
I do not know what the Green Party does internally, but the players on the political side that are willing to
Talkshows oder sonst was,
public media spaces, talk shows, where it is clear that, an aftermath will happen.
dass die sich darauf verlassen.
Threats are uttered, and thus you need to provide aid so that people can rely on existing structures so that they become willing to speak in public. Because if you are an elected representative, you cannot always live without fear. And
dazu zu melden für eine Position oder
so people, having the courage to stand for elections, this is all but self-evident. That's important, and I have to confess, I do not know
weil natürlich
whether the media problem can be solved externally. And if you criticize media reports, it's not necessarily an effective tool. For that reason, it would rather be an appeal to journalists. And I notice it myself. So
festangestellt sind oder die in Redaktionen sitzen,
have a full-time employment, and depending on who their boss is, and in many media houses, it continues to be white elderly gentlemen, and they determine what ends up in certain magazines. And if these people
dann sind sie halt überzeugt, dass man jetzt
focus on only
endlich mal was darüber schreiben,
certain writers, they continue to believe that you only have to
Toiletten
write
für
about
nicht-binäre,
their level
also
of
dann
interest, and
landet sowas halt im
like non-binary people is not the focus of their interest, and you could try to counteract this by
entweder versucht, humoristisch aufs Korn zu nehmen,
either seeing the funny side to it.
so woke, weil da Cappuccino getrunken wird oder was, ne?
Somebody says Berlin is so woke because they only
aber
drink
dass man dem was
cappuccino there. You can ignore it, but you can simply
Geschichten sind, auch wenn sie
show that such pictures or images are not correct, even if it creates media attention. Do you think this is sufficient with a view to the future? If you think of the elections, the general elections in France, where the atmosphere is really charged, as a political party, as a member of parliament, can you still reach out with your messages? And when looking into the media, do you simply need new strategies to communicate via the media? Yes, absolutely. And we, as the Green Party, are in a new phase where we are trying out such answers. Many Green Party members are on TikTok, and it would be too early to tell whether it's effective or not. In the run-up to the elections, this was not sufficient against AfD. Of course, we do not know what the result would have been without TikTok if we had not focused on Moscow and Beijing. But the young voters provided a very pronounced result, and we really have to reflect how this warning from, hostility towards democracy can can be formulated differently, but not leave up the social media spaces to the right-wing extremists. However, I believe this is shortening this too much. I'm a political scientist, and I really hold political analyses in high esteem, but when talking to school classes, they do not denounce immigrants, not because of their media experiences, but their real-life experiences. Or the lawyer, I cannot tell them there is a structural problem with housing in Germany or childcare, but if they have to provide shelter for 10 people next week, you need to provide substantial answers, and it is thus not a theoretical or media problem. And concerning classical media, I have seen something, and in my role, it is a pity that there's a little level of interest in European topics, and I think the national newspapers should report more about European policy. I think, in the European elections, people were really asking for European topics like the blackmail potential from or of Orban. How can we get rid of it? I think really the media should live up to their responsibility and take Europe more into the focus. Well, I think this statement deserves a round of applause, but when it comes to European topics and capitalizing on the European project, and it seems all but easy, and we are discussing, well, let's say, in rooms for spaces for debates, and this is somewhat distant from what is being negotiated on a European level. And there are many mechanisms that can, or levers that can be used, like the European Green Deal, debates that are plausible because people are insecure. So how can you move towards a positive recommendation for the European idea, as you put it so nicely? Well, how should we achieve that? Is it European parties that have a responsibility here? And if so, how can they bear responsibility, like responsibility for the EU? Would you like to answer that?
Ja, ich glaube, man kann diese ganzen
I think all these the basic problem that we have that we talk too little about Europe, and again the election campaign cannot be solved with appeals to the political community or the media. It's a structural problem, and the
Ideen dafür,
for example, Michel Schreier, the ideas have been on the table for 20 or 30 years. So what we really need is a European top-level playing field. Like, I'm electing this person. If they get the majority, she will have the mission to form the government, and we will call it a government. And it is a very well-known suggestion, but we are far from a majority. And,
bin so ein bisschen die Nervtante, die immer wieder
I'm really the nagger who keeps nagging about necessary reforms.
beim letzten europäischen
And in the European Council, we need to entrench the idea that a political debate has to take place. That's the first step, really. And at the same time, in the course of the enlargement, reforms
müssen da jetzt drüber reden, und zwar auf eine Art und Weise,
and we need to talk
auch
about
deutlich
it
machen,
in a way
was das mit
that
dem
makes it clear what it really has to do with the individual lives of every citizen, like the longing for security, the lack of security that we can provide stability by strengthening cooperation within Europe, by joining shoulders and trying to think of how a problem can be solved jointly. I think this narrative needs to be strengthened, and we need to sum up the courage to tackle the
diese
institutional
Debatte mit
reforms.
der
Well,
Bevölkerung.
is there a chance at all to have this debate with the people in the European countries, or is it really
Nein, ich glaube, man kann diese
something, a ghost that we are chasing after? Well, I think we can have this dialogue in society. We've seen it in several countries, in 3 countries in the past few months on climate, and it has become very apparent that there is a part in the
sehr viele
population
konkrete Maßnahmen.
that is in favor of very concrete measures as opposed to the status quo. And the question is how to integrate it
Von
in the
Europa, europäische
requisite
Integration,
processes.
ist es genau diese
European
Verknüpfung zu
integration
konkreten
is
politischen
exactly the link to
Klima,
concrete
würde sich
political
sehr,
topics.
eignet sich
The
sehr, sehr
climate is very well
dafür Leuten
suited
deutlich zu machen,
to make it clear to the
Europäische Union
citizens
braucht. Und ich
why the European Union is needed. And I think there is a high need to catch up. The 20 euros today,
nur Frieden
you
oder mit
know,
irgendeiner
just peace or with some
Leuten, die
small
heute 80 sind,
explanation is not
das
so
muss uns nicht
successful as among people who are already 80 years of age. And this shouldn't be a surprise. So these,
eigenen Würde.
you know, the climate would be suitable. I mean, I don't have the magic wand. And of course, I do not want to belittle other aspects, you know, on a level where there is hatred and violence against Greens. I do not want to judge that. I do not know what it feels like to be in this kind of situation. I haven't witnessed it. And it exists all the same, but there is also resistance. And, you know, we need to deal with this resistance. So we must not shy away from the autocrats. And in the political sphere, I learned better and I understood that the idea of giving in to the autocrats would lead them to want even more and even more. So this has, however, not been translated into domestic policy. Autocrats in the European Union would also be strengthened in their ideas if you give in to them, and that you would strengthen their narrative. I think progressive politics has a challenge here. I think, you know, traditional politics is a bit more difficult in this respect. Angelika Bauschmidt, I would assume, based on that, we have had
Der Föderalismus in Deutschland ist grundsätzlich ja auch eine gute Versicherung gegen Autokraten.
Democracy is a good security against autocrats. On the other hand, we know that it's also in European federalism, we are very slow in providing results. And the autocratic alternative may
zumindest showmäßig Ergebnisse. Wie
results that make headlines.
verzichten, die vielleicht sozusagen
und
mehr zu so einem zentralistischen System werden, entgegenzutreten? Oder
effective in counteracting autocratic trends? Oh, don't we need a change after all?
Braucht es immer?
Well, change is always needed. The only question is in what sense. And well, in the past few years, we have heard enough suggestions and alternatives and models on how to foster European cooperation, to streamline institutions without reducing them too much. And I believe, with a view especially to the US,
können wir zumindest
in
Deutschland froh sein, dass wir ein anderes Wahlsystem zumindest
we have at least a different election system that makes sure that a minority cannot install itself in power positions. Although Mr. Merz said something 2 months ago that he's not sure whether there is a difference in election systems between Europe and the US, or Germany and the US. So you could question that, but without praising the institutions, I believe we are in quite a comfortable position, but we shouldn't be tempted to say just because the exact way, like in Republican federal states, that right-wing extremists and reactionary forces are entrenching themselves in systems of power. And we shouldn't believe that it's not possible here just because the political system is different. Well, then we have a danger of other coalitions forming themselves. We know that especially on a local community level, right-wing populism exists in large parts of the CDU, also among the FDP, and people who are trying to get an extreme right-wing taste. I'm not an expert for European structural reforms. I wouldn't want to give hints here because people don't want to hear them. But once again, I know I'm being repetitive here, and it must be really frustrating in the political day-to-day business if you run against closed doors.
Aber ihr habt doch ein Interesse daran, mit uns zusammenzuarbeiten.
Saying, well, you should have an interest in cooperating with us in order to create a firewall against right-wing extremism. I think these forces capitalize on the idea that one would give in to them someday, but basically that's not the way it works.
Gut, ich glaube, das ist einiges an...
Well, thank you. This was really quite a lot of input for the subsequent debate, and how will we manage to bring about change on the EU level? That's a big question. We have been debating it in great detail. I think I would like to have a final round with the guiding question. Well, if there is one point where you'd say, okay, in the coming legislative period, this commission, if it and when it will be elected, what should change? So when next time, when we go to the European ballots, and if we look back, and if we take a status quo of the state of the European Union, what has to happen in the meantime in terms of political attitude? What should happen on the way? Oh, this is not an easy question for a final round, but I think it's really important that the EU becomes aware of its political role in the world, especially Ukraine, and we have already heard, that we need a geopolitical EU. And then you really need to fill flesh to the bones of such a concept. And of course, the foreign policy weight of the EU is good, and then Ms. Karas as being the foreign policy officer, that's a good thing, and a joint policy to be led by the European Union, that's really good, and then Germany should increasingly assume a guiding role, a lead role in the EU, especially when looking to France, and especially when really creating better ties with Poland, and the Green Deal, of course, is not to be negotiated, and thus we will always be in a situation where we want to shape and develop the green deal while assuring competitiveness. In this regard, it's always important that people will be integrated. There is talk about it nationally, but on an EU level, it's all the more difficult. For example, in agricultural politics, the strategic dialogue with the agricultural community, as we have it in Baden-Württemberg in South Germany, and the stakeholders and the citizens really need to be part of the process, so it will not be possible to paint a picture of the EU as a bureaucratic red tape monster, but you need to create the impression that you can shape European policy and make it closer and give it a more hands-on appearance.
Wo würdest du die Prioritäten setzen?
Where would you set the priorities?
Green Deal, Sicherheit, aber
Green Deal, security, and at the same time the rule of law. Because if we can learn one lesson from the past year, is that the EU has been too hesitant, too slow in combating those countries that really looking down on democratic values. So we used to need a unanimous decision on taking voting rights away from extremist states. But there's a more effective tool by simply holding back European funds. And this has proven to be very effective, and those countries concerned, and in Poland, it has led to the fact we have a very tangible benefit of moving within the rule of law. And other states, I'm not quoting any names here, other states, may fear exclusion, and these sanctions really have to be effective on a broad basis. It's an Article 7 procedure that we have lower thresholds for voting. So we are a community of values. We are defending our values worldwide, and we want to fill them with life.
Tarek.
Ja, ich hätte auch.
Tarek. Well, I can only agree to that. The rule of law as a topic, and I do not I do not want to act Cassandra, but it's really about preventing an anti-democratic rollback. It's really this question needs to be central. How can we maintain and defend our democracies against the assaults? And we really need a radical rethinking. I have just been in France, and the European Union can be a central player. Anna did not quote any names. I am Italy. We need to create forces that keep such countries in check. And at the same time, the progress Giorgia Meloni has made already, well, she hasn't abolished democracy, so she's not an autocrat. This is a very naive attitude, but or it can be strategic as well. But I have the impression that the message has not got through. Or if I had the choice between the left or the far right, and if people decide, oh, the far right is closer to me, well, this is really a very effective means of eroding democracies, and we still have a possibility of interfering, and this is becoming more and more difficult due to the number of seats for the right-wing extremists in the European Parliament. Yes, I would endorse that, and also based on the common exterior and security policy, foreign and security policy. Well, after the court ruling of the Supreme Court from Friday to yesterday, the court rulings, led to a situation where we have to expect that the US, in terms of climate protection as well as security policy, now looking back on the latest court ruling, that independent of who will be in the government, that such governments cannot be a long-standing partner. There was a discussion that Joe Biden was orienting himself less along Europe and more the Asia Pacific. Should he be re-elected, this trend would certainly be reinforced. And a democratic majority in the Congress, what climate protection packages could be obtained, but the Supreme Court ruling has made it more difficult so that the ministries have no longer the last say, but the courts that are in the conservative hands and right-wing hands. And the Supreme Court has also ruled that the president has granted immunity more or less to the president, anything on any affair relating to Article 2. And then the war in Ukraine with Trump as a president, the lawyers are already simulating this. An American president who would give Secret Service information to a hostile power, and Putin would benefit from it. So legal prosecution would not happen, and thus there would be a big shift, and maybe this information will trickle down at least. So for that reason, it is a very important point that we have to expect in terms of global coalitions. We have to expect this, even if it all sounds like a dystopia here. Yes, okay, so the climate has become more rough, but then you have to be tough in order to be successful. So thank you very much for this round, and we will remember today's European conference. This is not a look back, but we are right amidst the US elections, and we have to check how a new commission, once again, if and when elected, how it would act and what the situation in the US will hold in store. Have a great evening, and there is a reception, and thus I would like to cordially invite you to continue the discussions outside. Thank you. Have a great evening.